we had a great session for the self-checkout working group on planning for impulse sales and getting those unplanned purchases into the baskets and adding incremental sales to the store. You've had all weekend to think about it. What were your sort of reflections and thoughts as you think about the session that we ran?
Yes, morning, Colin. Yes, it was interesting listening. It was Tony Durham, who was clearly a real expert in terms of understanding how retailers can try and maximize sales in that space. What was traditionally the staffed checkouts, wasn't it, where there was lots of opportunities for trying to encourage customers to do some impulse purchasing. And when we now look at the way that self-scanning, particularly in grocery, has come in, and that the change of that front end has been really quite dramatic, hasn't it? And I think, what we're now realizing is that perhaps one of the unintended consequences of SCO, there are many, but one of them in particular is, it becomes much harder to try and manufacture that sort of impulse purchase opportunity that retailers have had before. And so it's interesting listening to Tony, describing what the potential value was of this. But again, the retailers coming on the line saying, yeah, but that it doesn't really work in that space very well because we've changed the nature of what the consumer is doing. They used to be very passive, weren't they? Which often encouraged impulse purchases because they were looking around at product was there and that's all they had to do. Whereas now we've turned them into sort of active workers in that space. They've got to go scan items and, do that job. And the consequence of that is that they're less inclined to, look at product that they may just suddenly want to buy. So, it was interesting reflecting upon, what are the consequences of as that space changes and what it might mean, once again for retail profitability.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? There was numbers quoted that the average wait time at self-checkout was 16 seconds and the average wait time at the assisted checkouts is 1 minute 55 seconds. 16 seconds is not a long time just to sort of sell someone on new products.
No, but I think, perhaps, on the plus side of this is that, as, particularly we're seeing in grocery where so much of the transactions are now going through SCO that inevitably you're now having customers having to queue up to enter the SCO areas, aren't you? You're creating these sort of corral spaces for them because it's just there's so many people now using it. And I think there is some limited opportunity as people are waiting to enter the SCO area that you may be able to do some impulse purchase there. And we've seen, haven't we, some retailers who have begun to use that sort of space where people wait to use SCO to try and encourage them to buy things. But it's much more limited. You've got basically one corral to enter 25 SCOs maybe, and in the past you'd have had queues at maybe 20 staffed checkouts, and so the opportunity is probably lower, but there is some opportunity there, I think.
Well, it was interesting, didn't it? Tony quoted one retailer that he'd worked with where they grew the sort of profits of the store, total profit by the store, by 19% by making people wait longer. And then he kept sort of bringing up examples of having Mickey Mouse in the line and the queue, of making the queue more enjoyable, which I think some people like you felt a bit sort of odd about.
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare to find a customer who enters a store and really looks forward to being in a queue, doesn't it? It's not really why you want to be there. And okay, you can try and mitigate the boredom and tedium of doing that, and often people just turn to their phones increasingly rather than looking at impulse purchases. But yeah, there's clearly this. I'm sure people are doing work on what is the tolerance around queuing now, and it's probably changed a lot. We traditionally been very tolerant people, certainly in the UK, around queuing. But as SCO has become available, I think our tolerance has dropped off because we have seen it as one of the major friction points, and it's arguably people claim it's one of the selling points of SCO is you can get through the stores quickly yourself. Right. And so I think that's a challenging conundrum that some retailers might have, which is, can we push the envelope of queuing time enough to get some impulse purchase, but not to the point where customers get very frustrated and may shop elsewhere because of that. I think one other thing, Colin, that struck me around the session was, we have to think more broadly about what we mean by self-checkout. We were very much talking, weren't we, about the sort of the fixed SCO areas where, and there are now, lots of permutations around SCO that, we can begin to think about in terms of how you can interact with customers around encouraging, what traditionally has been seen as impulse purchases, things like scan and go devices people using their own mobile device, can you begin to interact with those customers through those devices to perhaps have some impact on impulse purchases as well?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, look, this group meets again on November the 23rd, where we're going to hear some results from the self-checkout supervisor survey. What are some of the highlights coming up without spoiling the segment?
Well, we've had a pretty good response. We've had retailers responding from America, Australia, mainland Europe, the UK. So we're well over 6,000 or 7,000 responses to this survey. So it's a really good chunky response we've had to this. And so we're going to be hearing about, how people feel about the training they've received, the environment in which they're working, what they see as their concerns when working in that space. So I think it's going to be, going to offer us a real, interesting window into their world and how they have to manage these increasingly complicated and challenging spaces. And it's going to be, for the first time, I think we're really going to, hear from the people who have to work in that space. What is it like for them? We often speculate what it might be, to try and manage these spaces. But this really, for the first time, we're going to get a big sample of those people saying, this is what it's like to work here. This is what I would like to have around my training. And this is how they're experiencing problems of loss and the sorts of things that customers get up to in those spaces. So hopefully, it'll be a great session. I'm busy now putting all the data together and getting it ready for November.
Very good. That's on November the 23rd. We'll look forward to it. Thank you very much, Adrian, and speak soon.
Okay. Cheers, Colin. Bye.